Hello everybody and welcome to The Walking Dead Iceberg. And this is the first iceberg that I've made for the channel. For this video, I wanted the themes to be hidden Easter eggs, secret theories about the show, or just cool facts that not a lot of people know about. That being said, a big inspiration was Lazy Mobile 1806, which they made one of the best icebergs I've seen. And not only did I take a lot of inspiration and topics from that one, they were also very helpful to me on Reddit when I had a couple questions about the topics within the iceberg, so show them some love if you can. A couple things of note off the bat. There will be no big spoilers past season 9 of the show. So if you're still watching or care about spoilers after that, that's as far as I'm going to cover. There's a couple things that are in season 10, but they're in no way plot spoilers. They're pretty much just background elements that I'm going to make a point out of. And secondly, there's one topic in tier 3 that, despite me putting it in my own iceberg, I'm going to take it out for the video. It's Michonne's Negan hallucination, and while it's an interesting part of the show, after research, I kind of decided there wasn't really a ton to talk about, so I'm just going to cut it. I'm excited to talk about what is, in my opinion, the coolest parts of the show itself and what made the series so great, especially in the beginning. Also, if it's been a while since you've seen the show or you're just vaguely interested in it, I try to cater the iceberg in a way that it starts with concepts that most people who have a general idea of what the show's about could get a hold of, but as we go further down, it's going to get more hairy. And you know what else is hairy? You. Probably, I don't know. But you know what can get you to quit being hairy or continue to not be? That's right, today's sponsor, Manscaped. I've been using Manscaped since their first sponsorship I did with them, which was one of the first ones on my channel. And I've got to say, it's been a quick, clean shave every time that has never cut me, which, considering how clumsy I can be, is impressive. So I'm here to tell you about their new bundle that they just released, the Performance Package 4.0, which is a one-stop shop for all of your shaving or grooming needs. Included in this bundle is the Lawnmower 4.0, which is a totally waterproof and cordless trimmer that even has a built-in LED light for all of your shaving needs. On top of that, you get the Crop Preserver deodorant, which is an all-day moisturizer and deodorant that I've got to figure out how to... okay, hold on. And as you can see, you simply squirt a little bit of your deodorant out and then rub it in for an all-day moisturizing and clean smell. And while the microphone's still balanced on my leg, we have the Crop Reviver, which works as a refreshment that contains aloe vera and anti-inflammatory properties, and all you have to do is give it a couple fritz and you're good to go. I can assure you at this point that this hand smells fantastic. And then on top of that, it also comes with the 4.0 Weed Whacker, which, as someone who has got their eyebrows waxed before, I can tell you this is much more pleasant for all of those ear and nose hairs. But not only that, if you sign up for the 4.0 package soon, for a limited time, they're also giving you the Manscaped travel bag, which is handy and I've been using it on vacations over the summer, as well as the Manscaped anti-chafing briefs, which I'm not going to show you for obvious reasons. But yes, I am wearing them, and yes, they are quite comfortable. So Manscaped has given me this offer to bring to you. If you go to the link in the description and use the discount code Wendigoon at checkout, you will get 20% off the entire package I mentioned and free international shipping. So once again, that's the Lawnmower, Weed Whacker, deodorant, toner, carry bag, and underwear, all for 20% off and free shipping. Just use discount code Wendigoon. It can't get easier than that. Thank you so much to everyone for watching the ad. Thank you so much to Manscaped for sponsoring this video. It really does mean the most. And thank you for the t-shirt. It's quite comfortable. I hope you all get in on this and check out the link in the description. I hope that you enjoyed the ad, and we are back to the video. I'm excited, so without further ado, let's get into it. But as always, thank you for watching. Also, I realize I probably should have put titles to these tiers now. But it's too late now, so tier 1. Glenn never killed until season 6 is just a fact in plain sight that not a lot of people notice. Not killing was a big part of Glenn's character, because especially as the show went on and the characters began to be more and more degraded from where they once began, Glenn was always sort of hailed as this picture of purity. Like, he was the nerd who used to play video games and delivered pizza, and then he became the young romantic, and he was sort of an outlet for the hopes of a lot of the characters. And what's interesting about the way the show's structured, when his first kill did come in season 6 episode 12, the fact that it was his first kill was kind of overshadowed by the fact that this is just what the group does now. I remember watching the episode for the first time, and his first kill is the guy who's asleep in the Savior compound, and you can see Glenn struggling to bring the knife down. And whenever I watched that for the first time, I thought, oh, well, it's because he's never killed someone asleep before. And then I thought about it afterwards and said, wow, he's never killed anyone before. And also, spoilers again, but I mentioned that at the beginning. By the time of his death, he had only ever killed 5 people. To put that in perspective, at the time of Glenn's death, Carol, Daryl, and Rick had 46, 49, and 54 human kills respectively. I'm going to talk more in a bit how character themes and a loss of innocence applies to the greater show at large, but we'll get to that. Space Spore is in reference to the fact that Robert Kirkman has said the original cause of the zombie virus, Walker virus, was a spore that came to Earth from a meteorite. Now, he said this specifically about the comics, but since that's the canon way, apparently, that it went in the comics and the show never says, we can pretty much assume. And that can even be used to get over some gaps in understanding. Like, for example, if this is just a disease, how can people be a disembodied head and still be alive? So the answer is simply space aliens. And that's all there is to it. Of course, this is never said in the comics and TV show, and frankly, I don't really want it to be. But the fact that he said that was a reference to the movie Night of the Living Dead, in which, in that movie, which several held is the first zombie movie of all time, it was also a space spore that caused the infection. So, a reference that Robert Kirkman threw in because, as we're going to see, he really likes his references. Jeffrey DeMunn's departure. Alright, so just starting off with the good stuff. Jeffrey DeMunn is the actor who plays Dale in the first 2 seasons of the show. If you recognized him on the show, it's probably from movies like The Mist or The Green Mile. And actually, looking at The Mist specifically, you're going to see a lot of familiar faces between it and The Walking Dead. The reason for this is because The Walking Dead originally hired the head writer and show lead of Frank Darabont. And Frank Darabont and Jeffrey DeMunn are very close friends in real life. So whenever Frank got the show, he got several of his previous actors who have worked with him, including Jeffrey, to come on. So you know how a lot of people say that the first season of The Walking Dead's what really sold it, and after that it kind of just fizzled for a while and then had its high parts, but nothing really compared to that opening? Well, my argument for that would be that Frank Darabont knew what he was doing. He wanted the show to be grand and have these overarching themes of the human condition and how it all relates back to the story of Rick and his family. And a lot of the clever foreshadowing and setups we see for things that happen later in the series began in those first 6 episodes. However, whenever it came time for season 2 to come around, AMC said that they didn't want to spend as much money. This is the reason that season 1 is set in these massive cityscapes with these huge hordes everywhere, and then season 2 mostly takes place on a farm with 2 characters on screen at a time. Frank Darabont protested this because he was like, you want me to make a good show and you have the money for it, why can't I have more? To which AMC just kicked him out. And looking at Frank Darabont's, career, what? This guy directed The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile. It's not like he knows how to adapt a story or anything. So Frank did season 1 and then the first episode of season 2 before leaving. That's where Jeffrey comes in. See, Dale is a huge role in the comic books. As a matter of fact, for a long time, he remains as the group's sort of moral compass before being killed by the Hunters, which on the TV show is pretty close to what Terminus became. So in other words, he was supposed to last a really long time. The reason he did it on the show, it's widely believed, is because they got rid of his friend Frank. And the fact that immediately after The Walking Dead, Frank and Jeffrey started a new series is kind of proof of that. We're going to talk about what his plans for the show was later on, but man, YMS, or Your Movie Sucks, did a really good video in his Walking Dead review where he talks all the specifics of it. It is frustrating. Coma Theory is saying that the entirety of the TV show is taking place in Rick's head while he's still in a coma. The theory says that things like he shouldn't be able to survive in the hospital for that long, and this entire show is Rick's walk through purgatory, and in some instances even goes into detail to say things like, all of the gang that we see in the show is just the hospital staff coming around that he's incorporating into this dream of his. So the whole "it was all a dream" thing, because if Dallas didn't ruin it enough, the internet definitely will. The telephone scene is a series of 4 phone calls that Rick has in season 3 between episodes 5 and 6. After Lori's death, a phone rings in the desolate prison, to which when answering it, he's greeted by the voice of Amy. And then after that in order, Jim, Jackie, and Lori. All 4 being members of Rick's group who have previously died. Whenever Rick is talking to them, they're very vague about their location that they are at, but just say things like, "we're safe away from them, no one's been bit, no one's died," etc. Which of course, as we figure out once we learn that these are 4 dead people we're talking to, is all in reference to the afterlife. However, what's interesting is that this doesn't devolve into your stereotypical, "oh, you should join us, Rick, join us," or whatever. And instead, by the end of the phone call, Lori essentially tells Rick to man up and take care of their children. I'm not going to talk about what that may mean just yet, but keep that scene in mind. And then in a scene that took place moments before the telephone scene, we have Lori's body. So if you'll remember in season 3, Lori gives birth to Judith and then is killed by Carl so that way she doesn't turn. And then whenever Rick clears the prison to find her body, we see that there's no body there at all, and instead a trail of blood leads to a bloated walker, implying that the walker ate her body entirely. Now this is strange for several reasons. For one, that is a lot for one walker to eat, and for 2, how did it manage to eat her entire skeleton? And we know from the hair around the walker's mouth as well as the bloated stomach of it that Rick tries to cut open that is indeed the implication we're supposed to get. It turns out that in the original script, Rick walks into the room and there is instead a picked clean skeleton just covered in blood lying next to this walker. However, AMC made them pump the brakes on that because, you know, like, showing zombies get stabbed in the head is fine, but a skeleton? Whoa. It would have been pretty brutal, to be fair, for Rick to come find his wife and it's just like a red skeleton laid out on the floor. So they just filmed the scene exactly as it was supposed to be, but without the skeleton on the floor, which led to the fan theory that the walker ate her bones. So there's a comforting thought. We are now on to tier 2. Breaking Bad is in reference to the fact that it's basically confirmed that Breaking Bad and The Walking Dead take place in the same universe. Evidence of this is stuff like Merle Dixon has blue crystal meth on his motorcycle, which is the meth that Heisenberg makes in Breaking Bad. In a conversation between Daryl and Beth, Daryl alludes to the fact that he used to know Jesse Pinkman, also from Breaking Bad. And between the 2 shows, several of the same props, or at least the same style of prop is used, like the Dodge that Glenn drives out of Atlanta, as well as a coffee machine seen in the governor's office. This has also led to a fan theory that the original cause of the infection was the blue crystal meth, which I have to say I like more than the Space Spore thing. The orange backpack is a bit more of a symbolic Easter egg. If you'll remember in season 3, there is a scene where Rick is driving with some of the group by a hitchhiker on the side of the road who has a very large orange backpack. We see at the beginning of the episode, as the group is driving away, that he is screaming, asking for their help, and then at the end of the episode, they see his dead body. To which, in a rather cold manner, they stop the vehicle, take his backpack, put it in the car, and drive away. Now, we've seen that backpack pop up more times on the show, but when specifically have we? Well, one of them was in season 4 whenever Glenn leaves the prison after the governor's attack, and then eventually runs into Tara and decides to take her in. Another time in later seasons is whenever Carl goes to see Sadiq and essentially offers him aid and eventually takes him in. To me, the backpack has always been a symbol of mercy. Or basically, there was an unnamed person on the side of the road who just wanted help, and then after he dies, the group takes his supplies and drives off. And as the group itself learns to be more trusting, we see that backpack or the remembrance of how they used to be show up whenever they extend an olive branch. So in my watching, every time you see an orange backpack on the show, it's a sign of trust in someone else. Or at least trust that they won't, kill you, which is saying a lot for the show. Opening title decay is a fact that, again, is right in front of your face that a lot of people just don't notice. From season 1, it looked like the title was white or sort of like a pale, fresh body. And then throughout the seasons, the title has become more and more decayed, like a walker itself. And then finally, in the most recent season, there is a sort of green growth on it, symbolic of new life growing into the dead world. While maybe a little bit heavy-handed, they never directly talk about this other than just showing you the title, so I think it's fine. The phrase A or B has sparked a lot of questions. Once it's figured out in the show that Jadis, the leader of the scavengers, is making contact with the helicopter people, and I know they have a better name, but I'm just going to keep calling them the helicopter people. It's revealed that she's been giving survivors to the helicopter people in exchange for supplies. Now, over the radio, she tells the helicopter people that she has an A whenever she kidnaps Negan. And we see that she has Negan tied up, and it appears tries to turn him into a walker by having another walker bite him. And then after Rick washes up on shore and the helicopter people are coming to get Jadis, she tells them, referring to Rick, that it's not an A, but she has a B to take with her. So it seems like A means people who are bitten and B means people who are not bitten, since whenever she had Negan tied up and was trying to get him to turn, she referred to him as an A, and whenever Rick wasn't bit and was fine, she referred to him as a B. But there's a wrench in that one. Jadis tries to get Father Gabriel to come with her to the helicopter people's base, and whenever Gabriel refuses, Jadis angrily replies, "And this whole time I thought you were a B," before also tying him up and then trying to do the whole bite thing that she was doing to Negan. So the whole bitten or not bitten thing doesn't make sense, because how could you be like, oh, and this whole time I thought you weren't bitten? Like, in my opinion, and this is just my speculation and the theory I came up with, A refers to a prisoner and B refers to a passenger. Or basically she has to take someone with her back to the base, so she was telling Gabriel, this whole time I thought you were going to come with me willingly, but now I've got to tie you up and take you possibly infected or restrained in some way at least. So A and B means prisoner and passenger. And I have no further evidence, so we'll just move on. Rise of the Governor is a series of novels written by Robert Kirkman that is about the governor coming to power within Woodbury. It gives some interesting clues about the governor, like for example, his name isn't Philip, that's actually the name of his dead brother, and he just took it on for himself. And it follows him and his daughter Penny from the initial outbreak up until where the comic ends, while telling some stories from the comics from the governor's point of view. Not a lot to say about this one, but it's interesting that one of the best villains on the show has an entire series of books about him that not a lot of people know about. Negan intro refers to the fact that the version that most people saw on television is incredibly censored. And not in blood, they kept all that in. I mean the swearing. If while listening to Jeffrey Dean Morgan give the entire Negan speech, it felt kind of weird that he wasn't going all out with the bad guy, that's because he wasn't going all out. In the original recording, Jeffrey Dean Morgan drops 23 F-bombs, which of course AMC was not cool with putting on the air. So you can find the original uncensored version on YouTube and the DVD edition. And then on television, they just dubbed over nearly all of that. Similarly, the line from earlier in the show, whenever Rick and the group are held in the Terminus cart, and Rick says the phrase, "they're messing with the wrong people," that was also dubbed over. You can figure out what he said originally. Andrea Season 4 is another one of those interesting writer things. So in the original script versions of the show, Andrea was supposed to survive through Season 3 and take over Woodbury as their new leader, meaning that there would be two separate groups rather than what happened where the citizens of Woodbury simply come over to the prison. Not only that, but Andrea has a much bigger role in the comics, eventually becoming a love interest for Rick. So why didn't that happen? Well, 3 weeks before shooting began, Laurie Holden, the actress who plays Andrea, was told, "Hey, we're gonna kill ya." And in a move that has been protested heavily since, they decided to redo all of that and kill off her character for shock value. This started, in my opinion, a very dangerous precedent for the show. So we get it's a zombie series, we get the people can die at any time, that's understood. But since it's also a story, it would be nice if characters had things like, arcs and meaning and, you know, like importance. And a common thing you'll hear from a lot of people who worked on the show is that the plans that they had set up to be these big grand conclusions to storylines were often changed or altered because they were like, hey, you know what people wouldn't expect? If we ruin this storyline by killing this character, and there wasn't a lot anyone could do. So Andrea's death in the finale of season 3, when she was originally planned to develop into a much stronger character similar to the likes of Carol, is one of the earliest evidences of that. Now that's not saying every change that they made wasn't good, because we're going to talk about some of the good ones later, but I mean, that's got to be annoying to set up all these characters and plot lines and then they're just like, hey, what if you didn't? We are now on to tier 3. Helicopters have always been an interesting sort of thing that's been happening in the background of the show. It became more obvious later with characters like I mentioned Jadis and the aforementioned helicopter people, but there's always been weird signs of them. Like helicopters have been seen in the skyline all the way back in season 2. Not only that, but after mysterious disappearances of characters like Heath and then Tara finding a card that has PPP written on it are all alluding to the fact that there's a bigger world happening around our group. There's been several theories about where the helicopters come from. A lot of them relate back to that lady named Georgie. Remember, the one who just showed up in a van to Hilltop and then gave them a bunch of diagrams to make windmills, then left. That was weird. But the main theory is that all these helicopters are operating as a sort of enclave unit that work as the remnants of the US government. Lydia the Tattooed Lady is like the Breaking Bad thing I mentioned earlier, only in a much more metaphorical sense. So in the series finale of Breaking Bad, which I'm not going to spoil it for you, but there's a scene where Walter White answers a phone that's ringing, and the ringtone is an old song known as Lydia the Tattooed Lady. This is also the song that It's Shown Alpha sung to her child, which she named Lydia. Not only is this the same song being used on both shows, but again, not to spoil Breaking Bad too much, they both relate to the idea of villainy, or at least nefariousness in some sense, and an overarching theme of redemption. So the fact that Alpha named her child Lydia through the same song is this sort of correlation line seen between the two shows of the bad becoming better. Daryl alludes to Sophia is in reference to the fact that Daryl accidentally called it in season 2 episode 3. During the period of time where Sophia went missing in season 2 and the group was out looking for her, Andrea tells Daryl that she's probably dead, to which Daryl snaps back and said she's probably held up in a farmhouse somewhere, which, oh boy, was she. And it's just sort of a quick Easter egg that most people don't notice until their second time through the show. And also, just side note, the story Herschel gave about Sophia getting into the barn was totally stupid. Like, he claims Otis did it before he died, but Otis did not climb up there with a walker Sophia by herself and then flip her into the barn, and then everyone that like threw food to them afterwards didn't notice, or Otis never mentioned it. My theory is that Sophia was running to hide from walkers and then sought shelter in the barn, and then that's how she got bit, and would explain like her decayed state. Like, she got bit once and got away and turned, which is a depressing thought, but anyway. Walker decomp is the fact that as the show has progressed, the walkers have got more and more decomposed. Like, think about it this way. In season 1, they pretty much just look like people with sunken in eyes and pale faces. And then now you look in season 10 and the majority of walkers you find are skeletons with a little bit of hair on them. This calls back to the thing that Milton mentioned in season 3 of the show, where he said that the walkers do in fact starve, it's just really, really slowly. And as the show has gone on, the walkers have went from more agile and quick to slowly lumbering or just crawling in some cases. So this implies that one day the infection could end if the walkers simply die out, or at the very least are unable to move anymore. Which is probably the only hopeful theory on this entire iceberg, so let's change that. Rick is the villain. This is a different theory of how one could approach the show. Instead of looking at it as a story of survival, to look at it as a tale of downfall. Basically, it's like this. Rick's group has come across several other groups, and every time they've ended up killing them for the greater good. Now, in the beginning, this was always because they were attacked, and it was always a form of self-defense. But as the show went on, they got a lot more offensive with their defensive measures, to the point where whenever the group met the Saviors for the first time, they just got told by Hilltop, hey, there's these guys that are bullying us. So Rick just goes and kills a bunch of them. The idea is, from an objective point of view, Rick is the bad guy of somebody else's story. And the only reason that we view the group as the quote-unquote good guys is because we're familiar with them. And as the show has shown, every character, even people like Negan, have a sympathetic backstory, and if we were with them from the beginning, we'd probably view them as our protagonist. So maybe not so much that Rick himself is the bad guy, but that in this world, everyone's got to be the bad guy. And on that bright note, we are on to tier 4. Carol's comic book death is a thing I talked about earlier when I said some of the changes actually turned out kind of good. So remember how I mentioned that Dale and Andrea didn't die in the comics for a really long time, but died early in the show? Well, Carol's the other way around. In the comics, Carol commits suicide by letting herself be bit by a walker. See, in the comics, her character is made to show the links of sorrow that someone can reach in this world. Like, she's not a great mother to Sophia, and she's very reliant on everyone, and she eventually takes her own life while also putting the group at risk. Whereas in the show, she's a sign of how much someone can rise to be within this world by learning to get over the death of her child and then becoming a strong warrior. This is very similar, I feel personally, to Norman Reedus and Daryl. The fact that they had a character that was initially going to be a quick throwaway, and then the show writers went, I think we may be onto something here. And I'm glad that Carol stuck around on the show. However, there is a second reason that she's on the iceberg at this point. Whenever she gets bit by that walker in the comics, she has the fastest turning rate I believe ever seen throughout The Walking Dead, becoming a walker in a matter of seconds after dying. On the show, it's incredibly varied how long it takes someone to turn, so the fact that we've never really been given a solid time frame, and in the comics, Carol turned after a few seconds, raises more questions about this disease, but we'll talk about it in a bit. You know what it is a cryptic line spoken to Morgan in season 6. A short version is there is a prisoner at the hilltop that the whole gang is worried about, who is eventually killed by Morgan's apprentice, Henry. This drives Morgan to a sort of madness because his whole spirit at the time was to never kill anyone, so it hurt him to see his apprentice take a life, especially at such a young age. So after this, Morgan begins seeing that dead guy telling him these phrases like "you were supposed to" and the phrase "you know what it is." Now, this has never been explained as to what that saying itself means. However, we do hear Morgan uttering those phrases to himself and similar phrases whenever he's with Eastman. Eastman, you'll remember, is the sort of guru guy who taught Morgan how to use a staff. Now, in my opinion, you know what it is a conversation that Morgan has with himself, and this has been reaffirmed by the actor who plays Morgan, as a means of grounding himself in reality. That whenever Morgan sees these apparitions around him, he tells himself, you know it's not real, you know you're still here. "You were supposed to," I believe, is in reference to what happened to Morgan's wife and his son. But similar to the telephone scene, this is another instance of a character having a supernatural or hallucinatory flashback sequence in which the character gains some manner of introspection. Keep your mind on that one. Beta is a celebrity means that Beta within the show is a famous person. And no, not like the actor who plays Beta, like Beta the Big Whisper is actually supposed to be a prominent figure within the world of The Walking Dead. Within the comics, it's said that Beta, before the apocalypse, was a famous basketball player who became a famous actor, so Michael Jordan. And it's implied within the show that Beta is a famous singer. This is also supported by the fact that one of the Whispers recognizes him whenever he sees Beta's face. And as another added Easter egg, there's a scene at Hilltop where they're listening to a record being sung by a country singer. The person singing on that record is Ryan Hurst, the actor who plays Beta. So within the show on The Walking Dead, they are listening to a song that Beta recorded before the world fell apart, and now Beta is one of the Whispers they're fighting. Which it would be wild if you were in like the zombie apocalypse and then you rip off this dead walker person's face and it's Luke Bryan or something. Noah's death scene is the death of character Noah in season 5, episode 14. Now, a lot of people glossed over what was being said between Noah and Glenn in his death, mostly because everyone, including myself, was just furious with Nicholas at the time. But if you'll remember, it's the scene within the revolving doors where Nicholas pushes his way out, allowing Noah to be grabbed by walkers, dragged out, and then killed in a very brutal on-screen death. In those final moments, Noah and Glenn are grabbing onto each other, to which Noah looks in Glenn's face and says, "Don't let go," before being dragged away and eaten by walkers. On the surface level, it just sounds like Noah was telling Glenn to quite literally do not let go of me before Glenn was overpowered and Noah was dragged away. However, in reading the screenplay for it, it's a lot more depressing than that. See, in the screenplay, Noah is the one who lets go of Glenn. And the phrase "don't let go" was metaphorical to Glenn, reminding him to just be strong and brave out this world. So therefore, Noah's death in that moment was a sacrifice play so that the door could be shut back and Glenn could survive. This would explain Noah's calm demeanor and tone whenever he says that phrase to Glenn. So now go back and watch that scene, thinking about that little factoid, and try not to be sad. The actor Tyler Williams, who played Noah, actually collapsed crying on set after they filmed that scene because he thought it was such a perfect way for his character to go out, sacrificing himself to make sure that Glenn could live. Tainted meat is in reference to that scene in season 5, episode 3, whenever Bob's leg is being eaten by the people of Terminus. Man, if you haven't kept up with the show until that point, that had to be a wild sentence to hear. But basically, Bob is attacked by cannibals and captured, and whenever he wakes up, they're eating his leg. To which Bob begins laughing and tells them that right before they kidnapped him, and then cut off his legs, he had been bitten by a walker. And he begins screaming the phrase "tainted meat," saying that now they're all going to become walkers because he was bitten. So this causes the Terminus group to freak out and launch an emergency attack to get revenge on Rick's group, and then Rick ends up killing all of them. So that means the question was never answered. Were they actually at risk of turning because they ate the quote-unquote tainted meat? According to Robert Kirkman, you cannot become infected in The Walking Dead by committing cannibalism against someone who was bitten. Again, that's also a weird sentence out of context, but anyway. Meaning that the death of the termites and everything that happened to them was a complete farce. The entire tainted meat thing was meaningless, and even if unknowingly, Bob pulled a stunt fake out that caused the Terminus crew to be killed by Rick's group. Again, just another interesting way to look at the show. Radio hallucinations is another one of those sort of supernatural moments that takes place during Tyrese's death. So Tyrese sees several apparitions of previously dead characters come to him as he's dying, and the final one being the radio within the car that is reading out a news report. First of all, the voice in the radio that is talking is Andrew Lincoln, so that's interesting. But what's even more interesting is what the radio is saying. Tyrese hears the radio mention a village being attacked by night by machetes, children being killed in the streets, a burnt prison, as well as cannibal attacks. Now, in the real world, it's believed that this is audio from the Rwandan genocide. However, it has implications within the show, since all four of those things are things that Tyrese has seen the group do up until this point. See, the significance of the radio and the reason that the actual scene with it is so meaningful for Tyrese's death is earlier in the episode, Tyrese mentions that when he was a boy, his dad used to make him listen to the bad things or what the bad people were doing on the radio because it would make him tougher and more ready to face the world. And in his final moments, as Tyrese is hearing the radio, his last words are "turn it off," or essentially, he understands that the world's a bad place, but he wants off the ride. While a beautiful moment, it can also imply how Tyrese sees the actions that he's had to go through. Or in other words, all the events that we heard on the radio of these different attacks that our group has done, to him are just seen as more violence. And when put through that lens, it seems that Tyrese has had to live the life of the evil people on the radio that his dad once warned him of. So once again, on that very fun note, we are on to tier 5. Wolves Not Far is talking about the wolves. Remember them, the villains from season 5 and like half of season 6? They were hinted at beforehand whenever the group would come across graffiti as well as dead bodies with a W carved into them. And members of the wolves themselves have the W etched across their forehead. While never talked about that much in the show, it was confirmed outside of the show that the wolves' primary focus is one of primality. In other words, they're full and prim and believe that people should live without modern technological standards, and that the apocalypse was actually an escape from modern society. And therefore, humans should go back to their natural descendants or roots, i.e. wolves, and become more primal than they used to live. This is why they naturally come into conflict with groups like Sanctuary that try to live the way the world used to be. So in my opinion, the phrase "wolves not far" that we see graffitied around the show several times is in reference to the idea that the id or the shadow of you is never far behind. Or as the world gets worse, you have to become worse in order to match it. At the time in the show that this comes into play, it's particularly interesting because it's right before the fight with Negan. So wolves not far can be seen as a warning message to our characters that as they go into this battle, they're going to lose themselves. So another case of cryptic foreshadowing that a lot of people forgot about. Welcome to the dog trot. This is my favorite aspect of The Walking Dead and something that I wish they did more of. In season 4, episode 12, Still, which a lot of people hated, which is just a wrong opinion and I don't support it. Daryl and Beth are separated from the group and at one point go to a golf course so that Beth can get her first drink. Whenever they walk into the country club, there are several interesting things that they find that tell a sort of story. Upon walking in, they find the remnants of a survivor camp, as well as things like money and jewelry thrown all over the floor. And then past that, they find people in very fancy suits hanging from the ceiling. And as they keep going, they keep finding more, from a woman who's pinned up and dead with a sign around her neck that says "Rich Bitch," as well as several emaciated walkers that were stuck in the basement but all wearing very fancy clothes. The phrase itself, "Welcome to the dog trot," is graffiti that is seen on one of the walls within the country club. The idea is that all these little pieces are telling a complete story. A group of people, most likely those that worked at the golf course, rebelled against the rich or upper class that lived there. Hence the people hanging from the ceiling, hence the woman with the sign around her chest, etc. As well as the people wearing nice clothes who, it seems, made their final stand in the basement before they all turned. Even the little details, like the fact that there's only one bottle of peach schnapps left in the bar, implies that whoever was there beforehand tried to drink everything. It paints this picture that every place they went to have a story and everything is lived in. And like, being able to tell a story solely through its aftermath is so interesting to me, and it's things like that that I really miss and wish the show did more of. Morgan's Whispers is about the episode known as Clear from season 3. Whenever Rick meets Morgan again, the character who hadn't been seen since season 1. Morgan is clearly in a not okay state of mind whenever Rick meets him, and among the things that Morgan says is the fact that he sees people wearing dead people's faces. Now there's a popular theory off of this that this became the direct inspiration for the Whispers. Not only because obviously people wearing dead people's faces, whispers, blah blah blah, but this occurred relatively quickly to whenever the Whispers showed up in the comics. So people joke that Robert Kirkman got the idea because he was like, people wearing dead people's faces? Haven't thought of that before. It's also during this time that Morgan says he hears things talking to him, or he hears these walkers speak to him. Hold on to that one too. So remember how earlier I said we're going to talk about Frank Darabont storylines later? This is that part. So remember at the end of episode 1 how Rick crawled into the tank and he got the grenade and shot the walker that was holed up inside of the tank. What not a lot of people may have noticed is that walker was played by Sam Witwer, who, if you're like me and thought the face was really familiar but couldn't place where, he played Starkiller in the Force Unleashed video games. But not only that, he is another one of those previously mentioned actors who Frank Darabont was very close with and appeared in the movie The Mist along with Andrea, Dale, and Carol. So why did such a big actor have such a seemingly minor role? Well, the reason was the original plans that Frank Darabont had written for season 2 were very interesting. For example, he wanted to tell in one of the episodes of how Dale, T-Dog, and Andrea met in the city and got out. Among those, he wanted to show more decay of how the apocalypse started, starting with this National Guard soldier played by Sam Witwer. So in season 2, we were going to see a flashback of how the military was ordered to kill civilians, how they were ordered to quarantine people off, and eventually got overran. With the final shot of this proposed episode to be Sam Witwer hiding inside of the tank as there's walkers all around, thinking about pulling the grenade pin to kill himself, and then setting the grenade up next to him before dying, which of course is the scene that Rick comes in on the tank and ends up taking the grenade, which, if you'll remember, is the grenade that saved the group's life whenever they left the CDC. So the reason a famous actor plays a walker that's seen in one episode is because he was supposed to get a whole lot more in season 2, as well as telling the entire story about that one grenade that saved Rick's life. Which, I don't care if the show canned that, and it's not canon at all. That is how I choose to believe things went, and that's how I always will until I'm dead. Negan merch controversy is really stupid, but I couldn't not mention it. There was a guy named Ian Lucraft, who, I'm not doxing him or anything, he was very public whenever this all went down, who walked into a Primark in Great Britain. I don't know what Primark is, I don't think we have those in the States, but whatever. To which he went over to the Walking Dead section and saw a shirt that had Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo on it. Now, for those that know the show, Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo is the phrase that Negan uses whenever he's carrying his bat around. Actually, hold on. Whenever he's carrying his bat around. I forgot that I had this thing until I was literally talking just now and looked over and saw it propped up on the wall. Actually, it's probably good that I didn't remember till just now. I would have made a really cringy bit out of it anyway. So he saw a shirt with the bat that said Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo and complained that it was incredibly racist. So, you know the saying, Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo, catch a tiger by his toe, if he hollers, let him go, blah, 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 that whole thing. What not a lot of people know is that the saying has very, very racist origins from like 1800s like slavery times, but was changed almost immediately, and no one means it in a racist connotation at all. But as Ian said, quote, if I was black, and so, which, let me clarify, Ian is a white guy, it has nothing to do with him. To which Ian said, if I was black and saw someone wearing that shirt, I would know where I stood. Which, like, I feel like if you do that, you're the one being racist there, and I don't mean this in a whole like, oh, people who notice social norms are the real racists, like, not at all. But if you see a shirt with this on it and the phrase Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo, and you go, black people, like, how is that not way worse than what The Walking Dead was doing? Like, AMC didn't mean it in a racist context. It's not, it doesn't even have one until you add it to it. But he complained, so Primark took it out of their stores. To which Jeffrey Dean Morgan said on Twitter about the situation, people are so stupid, which, yeah, they sure are. Entry question was something that popped up in season 4 that a lot of people kind of forgot about. We see that whenever the group meets new people, they ask them 3 questions. How many walkers have you killed? How many people have you killed? And why? And while we're never told what answers the group are looking for, there are some ideas. Like, for example, if you were to ask someone how many walkers have they killed, and they're like, I don't know, I quit counting however many hundred ago, that guy's either really, really good to have on the team or really, really bad. And then how many people have you killed? For obvious reasons. Because the group has killed 2, but according to them, it's always been a low number and for a reason that mattered, which is why the next question is why. Or in other words, to defend myself, to defend my family, etc. Whenever they ask Bob this on the show, he responds with, because she asked me to, which I feel is another acceptable answer. However, what a lot of people didn't pick up on is that the first time we hear those questions asked is back in season 3, where Jim, through the hallucination that Rick has in the telephone scene I talked about earlier, asked him the exact same thing, albeit with a different sentence structure. He asked Rick how many walkers has he killed, he asked him if he's killed any people, and he asked him why he did it. So the proverbial questions that Ghost Jim asked Rick are the questions that Rick later used to ask people into the group. This show sure does like its ghost stories, huh? Anyway, we are now on to tier 6, starting with Hyundai. So Hyundai ran a sponsorship with The Walking Dead where they put several Hyundai vehicles in the show, and for 3 seasons they had that mint green car that was always in perfect condition. And even in the webisode that they did, The Oath, they pretty much tell the story of how the green Hyundai got to the group. What's interesting about it is, since it's an advertisement and since Hyundai wants their car to look good, if a character is seen in a Hyundai, nothing bad will happen to them while they're in the car. Like, they can get out of the car and die, but there will be no blood spilled within the Hyundai, and the Hyundai will never crash. So you can watch the show, and every time that a character gets into a car with the slanted H on it, you can be like, all right, we're good for now. Dwayne Jones whiskey is from season 10, but again, I'm not going to spoil anything from the show. This is just something that's seen on camera. There is a whiskey bottle that has printed on the front of it Dwayne Jones whiskey. If that's familiar to you, that's because Dwayne Jones is the name of Morgan's son. This led a lot of people to theorize that perhaps Dwayne was alive. Because we never see him die on the show, and we just know that it happened at some point between seasons 1 and 3. So people began to theorize that perhaps Morgan just went crazy and his son's going to see a revival within the show itself. This is actually a plot line that was done in the comics with Michonne, so it's not too far-fetched. However, in the episode, they actually talk about the whiskey bottle, not the name Dwayne Jones, but they talk about how old it is, and they're like, oh, this is 25-year-old whiskey, which means that wouldn't add up. And it was later confirmed by Robert Kirkman the reason they called it Dwayne Jones whiskey was not after Morgan's son, but after the actor Dwayne Jones, who was the lead role in Night of the Living Dead. So cool in concept, didn't really pan out. Still a neat little visual Easter egg though. Picnic foreshadowing is in reference to the dream sequence that Rick has in the season premiere of season 7. In it, we can see the entire group together having a picnic party within Alexandria in Rick's imagination of what if everything was okay. Now this occurs immediately after Glenn and Abraham are dead. And within the scene, we see symbolism of a character snuffing out 2 candles in front of the 2, which is obvious representation. However, there's a lot more subtle things if you start to look through the scene. I won't go through all of them because the original post is huge. But one original thing that someone pointed out is that all the napkins are different colors, and the different color napkins that people share can correlate to something. For example, Glenn, Abraham, and Sasha, all 3 have the same color napkin, which, oof. And they correlate things like the clothing or what food are on their plates to events and things that happen later in the story. And it's a huge post. I'll leave the link to it in the description because it is interesting. But man, there's a lot to comb through. The day will come is a shortened version of the phrase, the day will come when you won't be. This fact kind of got popular as people began to notice it more recently, but it essentially goes like this. In the finale of season 1, whenever the gang is inside of the CDC and it's about to blow up, they finally convince Jenner to release the doors and allow them to escape. As they're leaving, Rick shakes Jenner's hand and says, "We're grateful," to which Jenner replies, "The day will come when you won't be." The name of the episode in which Glenn and Abraham die, and Rick nearly has to cut off Carl's arm, and the group becomes enslaved by Negan, is titled, "The Day Will Come When You Won't Be." And considering that was the beginning of the end for a lot of the characters, it's such a gut-wrenching moment that symbolically this would be the moment where maybe Rick thinks the whole thing was pointless to begin with. Anyway, Children of Terminus. This is another bright, cheery one. So there's a scene within Terminus whenever it's showing all the goods that they gathered from the groups that came in, where there's a table that's full of children's toys and other children paraphernalia. And if you look around Terminus, there's not a whole lot of kiddos. So, termites eat babies. Johnny Depp's head. Okay, so in season 6, there is a part where they're getting a bunch of walker heads and trying to find one that looks like Gregory. And if you'll notice, if the one on the far right looks kind of familiar, that's because the prop department modeled it after Johnny Depp's head. Kind of just as a joke. They're like, hey, wouldn't it be funny if we put Johnny Depp's head in the show as a severed zombie head? And, I mean, since that's Johnny Depp's head, you could canonically say that Johnny Depp died in the world of The Walking Dead, and there's his head now. What's even funnier is after they were done filming, Norman Reedus just took it. So somewhere in his house, along with like the beard shavings of Andrew Lincoln, is the severed head of Johnny Depp. So I want pictures. Carol Cookbook is another thing from season 10, but again, not really a spoiler, just something that's seen. For a brief flash, while Carol is not in the best of spirits, she sees a cookbook that features herself on the cover along with her 5 dead, quote-unquote, children. All 5 being kids that she felt responsible for the death of. This is uncharacteristically odd for the other hauntings or episodes that characters have within the show. Like, we've seen things like the telephone scene and people believing they're talking to dead loved ones, but to see yourself on a cookbook in this like Betty Crocker scene with dead children is odd. This is also at a point in the show when Carol is becoming very tormented. So another supernatural mention. Moving on, we are now on to Tier 7. Kirkman Try to Kill Judith is more of an ongoing affair. So there were apparently several times in the show where Kirkman kept writing in different ways to kill the baby, because he felt that this is a very savagely destroyed world and everything's awful, and it would be really good for character development to just kill the baby. Also, Judith died fairly early after her birth in the comics, so again, kill the child. However, the studio kept denying him time and time again. The reason there's so many times in the show where Judith supposedly disappears or it's unknown what happened to her is because these were instances of Robert trying to open the door to her death. Like in the season 4 mid-season finale, whenever Rick and Carl come to the bloodied baby carrier and they think Judith is dead, that's because that was another attempt of Robert to go to the studio and be like, see? I already killed her. Now it's going to be weird if I have to bring her back, so you should just let me keep her dead. He since said that this was a dumb idea, and he likes the character that Judith has become. But it's so funny that every time in the show that you watch it, and you're like, wow, did the baby die? Robert was really hoping that the baby died. Purple Shirt Walker is an interesting phenomenon that was seen in the early parts of the show. So specifically, the Purple Shirt Walker was one that was seen in Atlanta whenever Rick was stuck inside of the tank. It starts off as weird because the walker is sitting there inside of a burnout bus before getting up and then walking out onto the street and seeing Rick. However, unlike all the other walkers that are crowded around him and the horse, the walker just stands there, kind of back a bit, and stares at him for a while. This is entirely uncharacteristic, as what we know, walkers are just mindless cattle that follow noise and people wherever they go. Except for this one, that just kind of watches. But if you'll remember in season 1, that wasn't the only weird occurrence. Remember Morgan's wife, who as a walker walked up to the porch and tried to open the doorknob? Or remember the little girl at the very first walker ever shown on the show who picked up her teddy bear? Even little things, like whenever they're stuck inside the department store, one of the walkers on the window is seen beating the window with a brick. These are entirely weird, uncharacteristic things that we never see later in the show. And even small touches, like all the walkers were faster then, whereas now they just kind of shamble everywhere. This implies that these walkers, in some sense, have some form of memory. Like the Purple Shirt Walker just remembered sitting on a bus, so that's what he did as a walker. Morgan's wife remembered walking to that porch and opening the door, so that's what she did. And I know that like the official thing is like, oh, well, they retconned all that, but that's lame. I don't like that. What I do like is the idea that the infection has gotten worse over the time. But whenever it first started, people were still in there, even if just a little bit. And it goes back to the question that not a lot of people have really asked, of what really are the walkers? I See Red is the quote that Morgan used when talking about the death of his son in season 3. In a fantastic scene, he's describing what happened to Dwayne in saying that his wife, his zombified wife, who he didn't have the courage to kill before, came and killed his son, who also didn't have the courage to kill her. And when describing it, Morgan begins to scream the phrase over and over, I see red, I see red. Now, the phrase I see red, while here maybe in relation to blood, is often used to describe people in fits of rage. And also think about the logistics of it. Morgan is there and so is his son. The wife, the zombified wife, begins to attack his son, to which Morgan, in this state of anger, would most likely kill his wife. However, it seems totally implausible to me that right there she managed to totally consume Dwayne or kill him to the point of total death. What more than likely happened is she bit him once, and then during this rage state, Morgan, realizing what he had to do, killed his son. So the phrase I see red may just not mean the blood, it may quite mean that Morgan went into such a fit that he either beat, shot, or stabbed his son to death, which makes his fallout that he had after that all the more understandable. And perhaps the reason he swore an oath of never taking a life is because he took one in such a brutal way and one that mattered so dearly to him. Vados gang is often forgot about, but one of the cooler elements of the show that got brushed over. So remember in season 1, whenever Rick, Shane, Glenn, and Daryl went to Atlanta to get the bag of guns? And then there was a sort of Spanish gang that kidnapped Glenn for a while, before it turns out that the whole gang itself was just a group of guys who was protecting a nursing home who the workers left abandoned. Yeah. What happened to those guys? Well, in a deleted scene from the first episode of season 2, remember this is when Frank Darabont was writing, and in a scene you can completely find on YouTube, the group goes to the Vados gang after the CDC explodes to get help. Once they get there, everyone's been murdered. And not just by walkers, although there are some walkers there, majority by people who have been executed with a gunshot to the head. Now, this is before any violent factions were seen in the show, so it leaves the question of who killed the Vados gang. Well, in the Rise of Governor novels that I mentioned earlier, it said that the governor went to Atlanta in the time period that would have been while Rick's crew was also in Atlanta. Now, while those novels are directly related to the comics and can't always be applied here, I do think the idea of the governor making his way to Atlanta, because remember it was supposed to be a safe haven, still fits. So it's quite possible in the original script and in the original deleted scene that we had a hint of the governor before he ever came onto the show. And all the way back in what would have been season 1, he executed the nursing home in order to take their supplies, something that we would find out later he wasn't opposed to doing. Axel's storyline was another one of those dark ideas that was theorized but they never went with. So remember Axel? He was one of the prisoners that Rick found within the prison who ended up being a friend of the group. Well, in the original script, he was supposed to be a sort of serial killer figure. He was going to stalk and periodically attack the group, and in the original drafts was going to kill Beth and brutalize Carol. The actor Lou Temple, who played Axel, was told right before filming that we're going to lighten up a little bit, so instead of attacking Carol like that, you're going to have a relationship with her. Because the opening of season 3 especially was very dark in a lot of the instances and stuff that they showed, and as previously mentioned with the whole Lori skeleton, this was in the same vein of, yeah, we can't do that. And a lot of the times with characters like Axel, if it seems like a character was put on the back burner for a bit before immediately getting a story arc and then dying, that's because often with the writing, that's how it went. Speaking of cut ideas, Eugene had a cut scene during his stint with the Saviors, specifically with the character Laura. Laura was played by Lindsley Register, who said that one day before filming, she got a call from her agent who said, "How comfortable are you with provocative situations?" And she said, "For The Walking Dead." Turns out there was an entire scripted, shot, and edited scene of Eugene and Laura getting it on. Now, this wasn't like a budding romance or anything. It was very clear through the screenplay that this was just more so an act of opportunity. However, that means somewhere out there on the internet is an entire scene of Eugene doing the deed in character, which that has got to be a conversation starter for sure. Carol killed the Andersons is, yeah, probably. So remember the Andersons, it was the abusive husband and the wife Jessie, who would later become a love interest for Rick, as well as their two sons Sam and Ron. They were all held up inside of Alexandria whenever the group came there. Well, Jessie, Sam, and Ron were all killed during the Walker invasion of Alexandria. Specifically, Sam had a panic attack while moving through the horde and was eaten by walkers, to which Jessie was then killed, and then Ron attacked and he was killed. However, if you'll trace that line back, a lot of people forgot the reason that he was so traumatized and afraid of walkers was because of Carol. See, Carol would constantly scare him and freak him out with all these stories, and that's what started these fits of horror that he would have. And it was one of these fits of horror that he had while in the horde that got him killed. So through that chain of events, Carol is directly responsible for the deaths of the entire Anderson family and there's even some belief that this was on purpose. See, the entire time she was at Alexandria, at least in the beginning, Carol was putting on a face in order to seem normal. However, as we saw in quick glimpses, she was still the same Carol through the whole thing. So, Carol despised the weakness that she once saw herself as, and the idea is she purposefully traumatized Sammy and others around her so that if a survival situation was ever to come into play, she would be the one to come out on top. This is similar to her killing several wolves as well as several Alexandrians during the wolf attack. So maybe the death of the Andersons was just another form of Carol's rapid and immediate social Darwinism. Walker Laurie is a cutscene from season 3. So whenever that whole period of time happened after Laurie died and Rick was just kinda out of it, there was another edited and entirely put together scene where he sees Laurie just outside of the prison fence, and after going to her and kissing to her, he pulls back to find that she is in fact a walker now. To which he freaks out, starts screaming and running around, and it's the whole thing. But similar to the Eugene scene I mentioned earlier, there is an entire edited scene that you can find online of Laurie standing there as a walker in her bride's gown, and Rick just losing his mind. I remember like back whenever season 3 and season 4 were coming out, people would post screenshots of just the Laurie Walker face and be like, season 5, Walker Laurie confirmed, coming back from heaven. And we are now down to the final tier, tier 8. Amy's Walker is technically a comic fact. However, it was too cool not to mention here. So we all remember Amy getting bit and dying in the Atlanta camp. It was one of the first major deaths that took place on the show. However, Robert Kirkman confirmed in the comics that the walker who bit Amy is the same guy who shot Rick and put him in the hospital. And the timelines match up, because as we figured out in expanded media and other stuff around The Walking Dead, the infection had been there for a while and had just been covered up until the huge outbreak. So Rick gets shot, put in the hospital for a couple months, wakes up. In the meantime, that guy who got shot on the road gets taken somewhere, comes back as a walker, eventually meanders his way through Atlanta and bites Amy. Symbolically, it seems that this one guy was the end of both of Rick's lives, his life pre-apocalypse and the first life he was trying to build post-apocalypse, as this was the event that made the group leave the city. And I really wanted to do that for the show, be able to be like, oh, it's the same one, they're wearing the same clothes or whatever. But the walker that bites Amy was played by Greg Nicotero, and that is not the same guy who shot Rick in the earlier scene, so close. Cut Maggie death is quite potentially a troll that was done by AMC. So everyone who watched the show knows about the season 6 cliffhanger. It ended with Negan doing the eeny meeny miny mo thing, and then finally he swings the bat down, but we didn't see who was killed until season 7. However, right before season 7 came out, a leak showed up online that showed the entire scene, only it was Maggie who was killed. And everyone's acting, and it's a fully edited scene of Maggie being the one who gets killed with the bat. Now, according to some reports, so that no one would know, even the cast of who was chosen to die, they filmed that scene with everyone dying. Or in other words, they did every possible iteration, so even the cast members didn't know who was picked. Now, I'm not sure of the validity of that statement. They definitely filmed the Maggie scene because it showed up online. There's a theory that AMC leaked that scene on purpose just to throw off the audience right before the show came out. Which raises a lot of questions about how they film scenes and how they keep secrets together, but moving on. The pharmacy sink is maybe the most brutal implication in the entire show. So remember the welcome to the dog trot thing earlier, the whole country club story that's told through the background? This is a much faster and much more brutal version of that. In season 6, episode 14, there is a scene where Denise leaves Alexandria with Daryl to go explore and get supplies. At one point, they come across a pharmacy, which on the outside is totally boarded up with walker hands all over the windows. Upon going inside, Denise gets to the bathroom, which has also been boarded up, and after breaking her way in, she sees a completely decomposed, just bones, walker on the ground, along with the word hush written over the walls over and over again, and then a sink full of water with a baby shoe sticking out of it. So, similar as the country club, we can see the whole story. A woman who was held up in the pharmacy at the beginning of the apocalypse, and the reason we know it's at the beginning is because the walker has a cast on its leg, implying that whenever she was taken in, it had to be recent around the time that she had a cast applied. She hides in this pharmacy with her baby, but most likely due to the baby's crying, it keeps attracting walkers, which is the reason for the blood on the windows. So she holds up in the bathroom, and after losing her mind because of the walkers outside and the fact the baby won't stop crying, she fills up the sink, and yeah, maybe the most brutal moment in the entire show, and the implications are horrifying. This would also be the only time in the entire TV show that we have actually seen a dead baby. Like, yeah, kids die on the show all the time, but we've never actually seen an infant. I mean, there's been times that there's been implications that they have died, but like you see that thing shoe in the water, and it's wild to me that the darkest moment on the entire show was a 2-second shot. However, I will say for a zombie series, it was pretty cool. Season 4 Lucille implies that Negan may have been around a lot earlier than the group thought. In Season 4, there is a scene where Beth is separated from the group and comes across a lot of corpses. If you look at the shot lying near them, If you look at the shot, you can see lying near them is Lucille in the dirt next to their bodies. Now, I don't know how many people active in the area that the group may know who was running around with a barbed wire baseball bat, but it had to be like less than 10. And while you could say it's just an Easter egg, once again, that's lame. So maybe Negan's been in the shadows a lot longer. And maybe their crossing paths later on was a sort of destiny that was always meant to be. 382,000 is the supposed number of people left alive on Earth. This is a very, very long math equation that people way smarter than me did to determine from little tidbits that were given throughout the show and comics how many people are left alive on Earth. This was done using the starting point of the show began in 2010, so they said that's when the apocalypse started, and from figures that Jenner gives of how many people died and how many people were supposed to be killed afterwards, and a bunch of stuff. They eventually got to the 382,000 figure, which let me tell you is like nothing. To put that into perspective, 382,000 is 0.005% of the world's population in 2010. But we can use that figure to get to another cool fact. So it's said several times by like Robert Kirkman and people who created the show that the ratio of humans to walkers is about 1 to 5,000, which is a lot. So if there's 382,000, just multiply that by 5,000 and we can see that there are about 1,910,000,000 walkers on Earth. Or in other words, about one PewDiePie subcount away from 2 billion zombies on the planet. It's especially interesting because there's a lot of questions about how many people still exist, can humanity survive, and considering that catastrophic of a reset of the population, probably not. Shane's original death. We are into the good ones. So John Bernthal revealed in an interview after his departure from the show how the script originally called for the scene between him and Rick to go. So in the beginning, the episode plays out the same way we all know. Shane kills Randall, Shane manages to get alone with Rick and the rest of the group separated, yada yada. However, where it changes is in the scene where Shane is pointing his gun at Rick. In the original script, as Shane's pointing his gun at Rick, Rick throws his gun down and says he doesn't want to fight him, and Shane keeps getting worse and worse and amping up Rick over and over, until eventually he just starts saying really evil, vile stuff to him, and in a fit of rage, Rick stabs Shane. So while Rick is there mourning and having his emotional moment, Shane turns, so Rick grabs Shane's gun, points it at him, pulls the trigger, and the gun clicks. Or in other words, the gun that Shane was using was never loaded the whole time. The implication being, Shane became so distraught with the way everything was going, with the fact that he loved Lori but he couldn't have her, and he wanted to be Carl's father but he couldn't. And in one act, Shane wanted to both die and make Rick take up the helm of the group. So Shane, never intending to harm Rick at all, provoked Rick to the point of killing him because Shane couldn't do it himself. I absolutely love this theory. I've always saw Shane as one of the better complex characters written on the show, because in the beginning, Shane didn't do anything wrong. He was looking out for his friend's family, he thought his friend was dead, and he fell in love. And the fact that his friend was alive just complicated everything he was feeling, and he just spiraled from there. To have that be his final death, that he never intended to harm Rick, but he just wanted off the ride, and he wanted Rick to take up the mantle, I see as so much more profound. The name of the episode in which Shane dies is Better Angels. And I've always imagined, like ever since I figured out about this theory, it was the idea that Shane couldn't be the guardian for the group anymore, so he had to pass that on to a better angel. And it's just one of those examples of something that I really, really wish they kept, because it makes a lot of what happens so much more impactful. The Lone Walker is a theory that a lot of people came up with online after the reoccurrence of a season 2 scene. So in the season 2 episode 12 Miles Out, whenever Shane and Rick are on their way back home after the whole fiasco with Randall and the fight that Shane and Rick got into, Shane looks out the window to see a totally alone walker walking through an open field. Now, this is uncharacteristic for a walker to not be in a horde, but that's not entirely out of the normal. Like, some of them can be on their own sometimes. But its behavior of just standing there still's a little odd, and a lot of people took more symbolism in it. So that was season 2, right? The walker showed up in the season 5 opening credits and stayed there through season 9. So that's really weird. They take this random shot from season 2 and then put it on 4 other seasons. But why? The theory is the Lone Walker is a symbol of our own Lone Ranger, Rick. After we see the fight between Rick and Shane, Shane looks out the window and sees a walker by himself alone in a field. And then as Rick begins to amp up the power and become more and more vicious, we see that same walker in the opening title. The idea is that Shane saw Rick for what he really was before everything else came to be. Or essentially the idea that Rick could be that bigger man. He could be that fighter. So the fact that we see that walker come back in the opening title sequence up until Rick's death, or death from the show at least, in season 9, further confirms the idea that that walker and Rick are interlinked somehow. So following the theory, the idea is that will be how Rick ends on the show. Either completely by himself and alone, or a zombified walker, again left alone, as the last survivor of the core group. And even though he's gone off the television show, there's still the movies, so the idea is that at the end of the movies, we will see Rick take over as the Lone Walker. And then finally, the whole world is haunted. This was a line that Tyrese said to Carol several seasons back that has always stuck with me. Ever since Tyrese said it, it's made me rethink what the series is. There are a lot of references to religion and God throughout the series of the show. Not only do you have characters like Herschel and Father Gabriel who constantly mention God, but there are ideas of prayer, there are ideas of heaven and hell, and everything else. So even if mentioned in like the way background, there's an implication of the spiritual. So speaking of the spiritual and the matter of human souls, what happens to people when they die? And I don't mean that like in the real world in religion or whatever. I'm talking about on the show. Whenever someone gets bit, do they die and does their like soul leave their body and then just whatever this space spore or infection or whatever it is just take over the body that was theirs and walk around? Maybe. But then how do you explain stuff like Morgan's wife as a walker? How do you explain the purple shirt walker? It's like these things have these glimpses, these quick flashes of what life used to be like. Which, side note, I really wish was an element they kept in the show. But it implies that somehow, some way, there's someone still in there. And these people, in whatever regard they are alive, if you could call it that, they are these helpless passengers as whatever this thing is controls their body and makes them do the things they do. So whenever I think of walkers, whatever I think of these creatures are on the show, I quite literally see them as walking souls. These people permanently trapped inside of these husks as their own purgatory. It's as if they're stuck there and aren't allowed to leave the earth. But it's not only the people that become walkers. You know all those like spiritual things that I mentioned earlier in the video and I've been like, oh, keep in mind that and that. Well, this is what I mean. Things like the telephone scene, where 4 characters who have all died and not turned to walkers, they've all completely died, speak to Rick. Or Carol seeing the visions of her kids through a cookbook. Or Morgan being taunted by the guy who he was supposed to keep his apprentice from killing. It's not just the walkers who are trapped as souls on Earth. It's everyone. There is a line Herschel mentions in season 2 when quoting the Bible, when he talks about how one day heaven will be locked up and the dead will walk the earth. It seems that whatever this plague is has trapped whatever little bit is left of people within these walking corpses, and that even after they die, they're still on Earth, still speaking to our main characters who are there. For whatever reason, it seems heaven's locked up and everyone is forced to forever wander the earth. And thinking about this stuff, it makes lines like Glenn telling Maggie, "I will find you," before he dies so much more profound. And all of these supposedly crazy coincidences, like the governor killing the Vados and then becoming the group that Rick fights, or Negan's bat being found with the group all the way back in season 4, only to then run into them later. And it's like all of these interactions are guided by some means. When Rick says the line to his group in season 5 that they are the Walking Dead, I think he meant it. Either being stuck in your own decomposing body or stuck to walk the earth and communicate through those who will listen however you can. It seems as if no one's allowed to leave this purgatory. Think about people like Morgan saying the dead talk to him, or even the Whispers who say if they listen that they can hear the walkers speaking to them. And I want to clarify, I never want this to become a main drive. I never want the show to be like, oh, they're all ghosts. It's just something cool that I think about when watching the show that I apply to everything. I think maybe Tyrese is right. I think the whole world's haunted, which in my opinion makes the show so much more terrifying. But it's a horror series and that's how I like it. And speaking of liking it, I hope that you like that, because that's the end of the iceberg. And I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for watching. I haven't done an iceberg about a topic like this ever, I don't think. They're all like, not like things related to media, they're just like movies in general, or like these serial killers or conspiracy theories or whatever. Like, this is the first time I have made a iceberg about an IP, but it's something that I like, obviously, if you couldn't tell by the way I talked about it, especially at the end. Especially how it used to be. Like, the early show was so good and I loved it so much. And like, I know people say that like the later seasons are also good. I haven't really checked them out, just because like I really love what it used to be. But I am glad that I was able to cover this. I'm glad I have a YouTube channel now that I can talk about this stuff, and that you all are out there listening, and it means a lot. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. Like I said, this was the first iceberg I built myself. I cared about it. I wanted this to go a certain way. Especially because it's just, you know, it's something I grew up with. It's something I enjoyed. It's something that really got me into horror. Like, The Walking Dead was very instrumental in like my ideas of creepy television, I guess. And I've always loved the series, and especially with that last theory, the way I've always viewed the show, it always made it that much more creepy to me, and one of the reasons that I love it so much, because it allows that kind of wiggle room for you to figure it out for yourself. That's the main reason I don't like the space spore and all that stuff. I've always imagined it, not quite literally that they are in purgatory, just that they are trapped in the world. And I've always loved the idea that heaven's been locked up. It makes it that much scarier to me, and that's why I've always enjoyed it. But anyway, so thank you. I'll quit talking about it now. Thank you for watching the show. The episode. I'm tired. Thank you for. I said episode. It's not a show or an episode. Thank you for watching my video on YouTube. Thank you about this show that has episodes. I hope that you enjoyed. You all have been fantastic. What are we at now? Like 560. Like some stupidly high number I can't comprehend. You guys are fantastic, and thank you for that. Thank you to my top tier patrons over here. Thank you to all of my patrons. You guys have been great. I made that decision to, like, if you're a patron, you know, but I made the decision to get rid of the $20 tier, and then like help like do the whole refund thing for all that, and you guys have been fantastic. And just being very supportive of me, and you guys, like, I knew you would be, because you guys are so kind and forgiving, and I really appreciate it. But thank you all so much for your time, and thank you for watching this video. So I don't know what's going to get posted first, this or the serial killer iceberg. It's a toss-up, one or the other. And then after that, there will be the conspiracy theory iceberg, and then a couple one-off videos. So I hope you stick around for those. But if not, I hope that you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for being here. I hope that you have a good day. That should do it. And I will see you in the next one. Bye!